Hey everyone, it's Cynthia from cynscraftingworld. So you can see my setup is a little different tonight. Um, I am at home, but I'm in a hospital bed. Because my left knee is so bad, they want me to stay off of it and keep it splinted. I have a tear in my kneecap and stage 4 arthritis. It's extremely painful, which prevents me from doing a lot of things. I don't have my knee brace on because I'm in bed. I'm just not walking on it, or trying not to anyway. I'm set up in the living room because I've got everything I need right here. Got my end table, all my yarn is behind me, the wheelchair is over there. Yeah, so I'm going to be having this bed anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months, or somewhere in between. Who knows? But I thought I would continue reading from my hospital bed. So let's continue with, what is it, Mystery by Chance? All right. The Messenger. The bullet entered here, said Max Forte, and he placed his middle finger over a smooth hole exactly in the center of the forehead. I sat down upon a mound of dry seaweed and unslung my fowling piece. The little chemist cautiously felt the edges of the shot hole, first with his middle finger, then with his thumb. "Let me see the skull again," said I. Max Forte picked it up from the sod. "It's like all the others," he observed. I nodded without offering to take it from him. After a moment, he thoughtfully replaced it upon the grass at my feet. "It's like all the others," he repeated, wiping his glasses on his handkerchief. "I thought you might care to see one of the skulls, so I brought this over from the gravel pit. The men from Banalek are digging yet. They ought to stop." "How many skulls are there altogether?" I inquired. "They found 48 skulls. There are 39 noted in the list. They lie piled up in the grave pit on the edge of Le Binhan's wheat field. The men are at work yet. Le Binhan is going to stop them." "Let's go over," said I, and I picked up my gun and started across the cliffs, Forte on one side, Memi on the other. "Who has the list?" I asked, lighting my pipe. "You say there is a list?" "The list was found rolled up in a brass cylinder," said the little chemist. He added, "You should not smoke here. You know, if a single spark drifted into the wheat—" "Ah, but I have a cover to my pipe," said I, smiling. Forte watched me as I closed the pepper box arrangement over the glowing bowl of the pipe. He continued, "The list was made out on thick yellow paper. The brass tube has preserved it. It is as fresh today as it was in 1760. You shall see it." "Is that the date?" "The list is dated April 1760. The Brigadier Durand has it. It is not written in French." "Not written in French!" I exclaimed. "No," replied Forte solemnly. "It is written in Breton." "But," I protested, "the Breton language was never written or printed in 1760. "Except by priests," said the chemist. "I have heard of but one priest who ever wrote the Breton language," I began. Forte stole a glance at my face. "You mean the Black Priest?" he asked. I nodded. Forte opened his mouth to speak again, hesitated, and finally shut his teeth obstinately over the wheat stem that he was chewing. And the black priest? I suggested encouragingly. But I knew it was useless, for it is easier to move the stars from their courses than to make an obstinate Breton talk. We walked on for a minute or two in silence. "Where is the Brigadier Durand?" I asked, motioning Mimi to come out of the wheat, which he was trampling as though it were heather. As I spoke, we came in sight of the farther edge of the wheat field, and in the dark, wet mass of cliffs beyond. "Durand is down there. You can see him. He stands just behind the mayor of St. Gildas." "I see," said I, and we struck straight down, following a sun-baked cattle path across the heather. When we reached the edge of the wheat field, Le Bihan, the mayor of St. Gildas, called to me, and I tucked my gun under my arm and skirted the wheat to where he stood. 38 skulls, he said in his thin, high-pitched voice. "There is but one more, and I am opposed to further search. I suppose Forte told you?" I shook hands with him and returned the salute of the Brigadier Durand. "I am opposed to further search," repeated Le Bihan, nervously picking at the massive silver buttons which covered the front of his velvet broadcloth jacket like a breastplate of scale armor. Durand pursed up his lips, twisted his tremendous mustache, and hooked his thumbs in his saber belt. "As for me," he said, "I am in favor of further search." "Further search for what? For the 39th skull?" I asked. Le Bihan nodded. Durand followed at the sunlit sea, rocking like a bowl of molten gold from the cliffs to the horizon. I followed his eyes. On the dark glistening cliffs, silhouetted against the glare of the sea, sat a cormorant, black, motionless, its horrible head raised towards heaven. "Where is that list, Durand?" I asked. The gendarme rummaged in his despatch pouch and produced a brass cylinder about a foot long. Very gravely he unscrewed the head and dumped out a scroll of thick yellow paper closely covered with writing on both sides. At a nod from Le Bihan, he handed me the scroll, but I could make nothing of the coarse writing, now faded to a dull brown. Come, Le Bihan," I said impatiently. "Translate it, won't you? You and Max Forte make a lot of mystery out of nothing, it seems." Le Bihan went to the edge of the pit, where the 3 Banalec men were digging, gave an order or two in Breton, and turned to me. As I came to the edge of the pit, the Banalec men were removing a square piece of sailcloth from what appeared to be a pile of cobblestones. "Look," said Le Bihan shrilly. I looked. The pile below was a heap of skulls. After a moment I clambered down the gravel sides of the pit and walked over to the men of Banalec. They saluted me gravely, leaning on their picks and shovels and wiping their sweating faces with sunburned hands. "How many?" I said in Breton. 38, they replied. I glanced around. Beyond the heap of skulls lay 2 piles of human bones. Beside these was a mound of broken, rusted bits of iron and steel. Looking closer, I saw that this mound was composed of rusty bayonets, saber blades, scythe blades, and with here and there a tarnished buckle attached to a bit of leather hard as iron. I picked up a couple of buttons and a belt plate. The buttons bore the Royal Arms of England. The belt plate was emblazoned with the English arms, and also the number 27. I have heard my grandfather speak of the terrible English regiment of the 27th Foot, which landed and stormed the fort up there, said one of the Banalec men. Oh, said I, then these are the bones of English soldiers? Yes, said the men of Banalec. Le Bihan was calling me from the edge of the pit above, and I handed the belt plate and buttons to the men and climbed the side of the excavation. Well, said I, trying to prevent Mimi from Mem from leaping up and licking my face as I emerged from the pit. I suppose you know what these bones are. What are you going to do with them? There was a man, said Le Bihan angrily, an Englishman, who passed here in a dog cart on his way to Quimper about an hour ago. And what do you suppose he wished to do? Buy the relics? I asked, smiling. Exactly, the pig, piped the mayor of St. Gildas. Jean-Marie Tregun, who found the bones, was standing there where Max Forte stands. And do you know what he answered? He spat upon the ground and said, Pig of an Englishman, do you take me for a desecrator of graves? I knew Tregun, a sober, blue-eyed Breton, who lived from one year end to the other without being able to afford a single bit of meat for a meal. How much did the Englishman offer Tregun? I asked. 200 francs for the skulls alone. I thought of the relic hunters and the relic buyers of the battlefields of our Civil War. 1760 is long ago, I said. Respect for the dead can never die, said Forte. And the English soldiers came here to kill your fathers and burn your homes, I continued. They were murderers and thieves, but they are dead, said Tregun, coming up from the beach below, his long sea rake balanced on his dripping jersey. How much do you earn every year, Jean-Marie? I asked, turning to shake hands with him. 220 francs, monsieur. $45 a year, I said. Bah, you are worth more, Jean. Will you take care of my garden for me? My wife wished me to ask you. I think it would be worth 100 francs a month, to you and to me. Come on, Le Bihan. Come along, Forte, and you, Duran. I want somebody to translate that list into French for me. Tregun stood gazing at me, his blue eyes dilated. You may begin at once, I said, smiling, if the salary suits you. It suits, said Tregun, fumbling for his pipe in a silly way that annoyed Le Bihan. Then go and begin your work, cried the mayor impatiently, and Tregun started across the moors toward St. Gildas, taking off his velvet-ribboned cap to me. Excuse me. Taking off his velvet-ribboned cap to me and gripping his sea rake very hard. You offer him more than my salary, said the mayor after a moment's contemplation of his silver buttons. Pooh, said I. What do you do for your salary except play dominoes with Max Forte at the Groyen? Le Bihan returned red, but Duran rattled his saber and winked at Max Forte. Hang on. And I slipped my arm through the arm of the sulky magistrate, laughing. There's a shady spot under the cliff, I said. Come on, Le Bihan, and read me what is on that scroll. In a few moments we reached the shadow of the cliff, and I threw myself upon the turf, chin on hand to listen. The gendarme, Duran, also sat down, twisting his mustache into needle-like points. Forte leaned against the cliff, polishing his glasses and examining us with vague, near-sighted eyes, and Le Bihan, the mayor, planted himself in our midst, rolling up the scroll and tucking it under his arm. First of all, he began in a shrill voice, I am going to light my pipe, and while lighting it, I shall tell you what I have heard about the attack on Fort Yonder. My father told me, his father told him. He jerked his head in the direction of the ruined fort, a small, square stone structure on the sea cliff, now nothing but crumbling walls. Then he slowly produced a tobacco pouch, a bit of flint and tinder, and a long-stemmed pipe fitted with a microscopical bowl of baked clay. To fill such a pipe requires 10 minutes close attention. To smoke it to a finish takes but 4 puffs. It is very Breton, this Breton pipe. It is the crystallization of everything Breton. Go on, said I, lighting a cigarette. The fort, said the mayor, was built by Louis XIV and was dismantled twice by the English. Louis XV restored it in 1739, and in 1760 it was carried by assault by the English. They came across from the island of Groix, 3 shiploads, and they stormed the fort and sacked St. Julien yonder. And they started to burn St. Gildas. You can see the marks of the bullets on my house yet. But the men of Banalec and the men of Laurier fell upon them with pike and scythe, and blunderbuss, and those who did not run away lie there below the gravel pit now, 38 of them. And the 39th skull? I asked, finishing my cigarette. The mayor had succeeded in filling his pipe, and now began to put his tobacco pouch away. The 39th skull, he mumbled, holding the pipe stem between his defective teeth. The 39th skull is no business of mine. I have told the Banalec men to cease digging. But who is the missing skull? I persisted curiously. The mayor was busy trying to strike the spark to his tinder. Presently he set it aglow, applied it to his pipe, took the prescribed 4 puffs, knocked the ashes out of the bowl, and gravely replaced the pipe in his pocket. The missing skull? He asked. Yes, I said impatiently. The mayor slowly unrolled the scroll and began to read, translating from the Breton into French, and this is what he read. On the cliffs of St. Gildas, April 13, 1760. On this day, by order of the Count Sosic, General-in-Chief of the Breton forces now lying in Kerselec Forest, the bodies of 38 English soldiers of the 27th, 50th, and 72nd regiments of foot were buried in this spot, together with their arms and equipments. The mayor paused and glanced at me reflectively. Go on, Lebihan, I said. With them, continued the mayor, turning the scroll and reading on the other side, was buried the body of that vile traitor who betrayed the fort to the English. The manner of his death was as follows. By order of the most noble Count of Sosic, the traitor was first branded upon the forehead with the brand of an arrowhead. The iron burned through the flesh and was pressed heavily so that the brand should even burn into the bone of the skull. The traitor was then led out and bidden to kneel. He admitted having guided the English from the island of Groix. Although the priest and Frenchman, he had violated his priestly office to aid him in discovering the password to the fort. This password he extorted during profession from a young Breton girl who was in the habit of rowing across from the island of Groix to visit her husband in the fort. When the fort fell, this young girl, crazed by death of her husband, sought the Count of Sosic and told how the priest had forced her to confess to him all she knew about the fort. The priest was arrested at St. Gildas and was about to cross the river to Lorient. When arrested, he cursed the girl. Marie Trevec! What? I exclaimed. Marie Trevec? Marie Trevec, repeated Lebihan. The priest cursed Marie Trevec and all her family and descendants. He was shot as he knelt, having a mask of leather over his face, because the Bretons who composed the squad of execution refused to fire at a priest unless his face was concealed. The priest was Lab Sorug, commonly known as the Black Priest on account of his dark face and swarthy eyebrows. He was buried with a stake through his heart. Lebihan paused, hesitated, looked at me, and handed the manuscript back to Durand. The gendarme took it and slipped it into the brass cylinder. So, said I, the 39th skull is the skull of the Black Priest. Yes, said Forte. I hope they won't find it. I have forbidden them to proceed, said the mayor curiously. You heard me, Max Forte. I rose and picked up my gun. Mom came and pushed his head into my hand. That's a fine dog, observed Duran, also rising. Why don't you wish to find his skull? I asked Le Bihan. It would be curious to see whether the arrow branch really burned into the bone. There is something in that scroll that I didn't read to you, said the mayor grimly. Do you wish to know what it is? Of course, I replied in surprise. Give me the scroll again, Duran, he said. Then he read from the bottom. I, Labsor, forced to write the above by my executioners, have written it in my own blood, and with it I leave my curse, the curse on St. Gilda's, on Marie Trévêque, and on her descendants. I will come back to St. Gilda's when my remains are disturbed. Woe to that Englishman whom my branded skull shall touch. What rot, I said. Do you believe it is really written in his own blood? I am going to test it, said Forte. At the request of Monsieur le Maire. I am not anxious for the job, however. See, said Le Bihan, holding out the scroll to me. It is signed, L'Abbé Sorgue. I glanced curiously over the paper. It must be the Black Priest, I said. He was the only man who wrote in the Breton language. This is a wonderfully interesting discovery, for now, at last, the mystery of the Black Priest's disappearance is cleared up. You will, of course, send the scroll to Le Paris Le Bihan? No, said the mayor obstinately. It shall be buried in the pit below where the rest of the Black Priest lies. I looked at him and recognized that argument would be useless, but still I said, It will be a loss to history, Monsieur Le Bihan. All the worse for history, then, said the enlightened mayor of St. Gilda's. We had sauntered back to the gravel pit while speaking. The men of Banelec were carrying the bones of the English soldier towards the St. Gilda's cemetery. On the cliffs to the east were already a knot of white-coiffed women stood in attitudes of prayer, and I saw a somber robe of a priest among the crosses of the little graveyard. They were thieves and assassins. They are dead now, muttered Max Forte. Respect the dead, repeated the mayor of St. Gilda's, looking after the Banelec men. It was written in that scroll that Marie Trévêque of Groix Island was cursed by the priest. She and her descendants, I said, touching Le Bihan on the arm. There was a Mie Trévêque who married an Yves Trévêque of St. Gilda. Is it the same? Said Le Bihan, looking at me obliquely. Oh, said I, then there were ancestors of my wife. Do you fear the curse? Asked Le Bihan. What? I laughed. There was a case of the Purple Emperor, said Max Forte timidly. Startled for a moment, I faced him, then shrugged my shoulders and kicked at the smooth bit of rock which lay near the edge of the pit, almost embedded in gravel. Do you suppose the Purple Emperor drank himself crazy because he was descended from Marie Trévêque? I asked contemptuously. Of course not, said Max Forte hastily. Of course not, piped the mayor. I only... Hello, what's that you're kicking? What? I said, glancing down at the same time, involuntarily giving another kick. A smooth bit of rock dislodged itself and rolled out of the loosened gravel at my feet. The 39th skull, I exclaimed. By jingo, it's the noddle of the Black Priest. See? There is the arrowhead branded on the front. The mayor stepped back. Max Forte also retreated. There was a pause during which I looked at them, and they looked away, looked anywhere but at me. I don't like it, said the mayor at last, in a husky, high voice. I don't like it. The scroll says he will come back to St. Gilda's. when the remains are disturbed. I don't like it, Monsieur Darel. Bosh, I said. The poor wicked devil is where he can't get out. For heaven's sakes, Le Bahan, what is the stuff you are talking in the year of our grace, 1896? The mayor gave me a look. And he says, Englishman. You are an Englishman, Monsieur Darel, he announced. You know better. You know I'm an American. It's all the same, said the mayor of St. Gildas obstinately. No, it isn't, I answered, much exasperated, and deliberately pushed the skull till it rolled into the bottom of the gravel pit below. Cover it up, said I. Bury the scroll with it too, if you insist. But I think you ought to send it to Paris. Don't look so gloomy, Fortin, unless you believe in werewolves and ghosts. Hey, what the devil's the matter with you anyway? What are you staring at, Le Bahan? Come, muttered the mayor in a low, tremulous voice. It's time we got out of this. Did you see, Fortin? I saw, whispered Max Fortin, pallid and with fright. The two men were almost running across the sunny pasture now, and I hastened after them, demanding to know what was the matter. Matter, chattered the mayor, gasping with exasperation and terror. The skull is rolling uphill again, and he burst into a terrified gallop. Max Fortin followed close behind. I watched them stampeding across the pasture, then turned toward the gravel pit, mystified, incredulous. The skull was lying on the edge of the pit, exactly where it had been before I pushed it over the edge. For a second I stared at it. A singular chilly feeling crept up my spinal column, and I turned and walked away, sweat starting from the root of every hair on my head. Before I had gone 20 paces, the absurdity of the whole thing struck me. I halted, hot with the shame and annoyance, and retraced my steps. There lay the skull. I rolled a stone down instead of the skull. I muttered to myself. Then, with the butt of my gun, I pushed the skull over the edge of the pit and watched it roll to the bottom. And as it struck to the bottom of the pit, Mem, my dog, suddenly whipped his tail between his legs, whimpering, and made off across the moor. Mem! I shouted angrily and astonished, but the dog only fled the faster, and I ceased calling him from sheer surprise. What the mischief is the matter with that dog? I thought. He had never before played me at such a trick. Mechanically, I glanced into the pit, and I could not see the skull. I looked down. The skull lay at my feet again, touching them. Good heavens, I stammered, and struck at it blindly with my gun stock. The ghastly thing flew into the air, whirling over and over, and rolled down the sides of the pit to the bottom. Breathlessly, I stared at it, then, confused and scarcely comprehending, I stepped back from the pit, still facing it, 1, 10, 20 paces, my eyes almost staring from my head as though I expected to see the thing roll up from the bottom of the pit under my very gaze. At last I turned my back to the pit and strode out across the gorse-covered moorland toward my home. As I reached the road that winds from St. Gildas to St. Julien, I gave one hasty glance at the pit over my shoulder. The sun shone hot in the sod about the excavation. There was something white and bare and round on the turf at the edge of the pit. It might have been a stone. There were plenty of them lying about. Just see. That is the end of this section. I am going to end it there, and we will continue next time. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good evening. Bye for now, everyone.